Please welcome General Manager, Energy and Utilities, AWS, Howard Geffen.
Good afternoon, and welcome to reInvent, and welcome to the leadership session on energy innovation and reinvention in the energy industry. I'm Howard Geffen. I run the Energy and Utilities Industry Business Unit here at Amazon. And I've been at Amazon for over 15 years. And in that time, I've been on the retail side, on the consumer side, and the payment side. And in all of those places, I've seen all kinds of reinvention and innovation to get to where we are today. But nothing is more fundamental than energy. And I'm super excited to host the conversation with senior leaders from Phillips 66, New England ISO, and Duke Energy on how the energy industry is deploying digital technologies to transform and innovate and accelerate their businesses through the energy transition. As an introduction, the energy industry is facing unprecedented macro and microeconomic changes and challenges, from the energy supply to logistics to the delicate balance between energy security and energy transition. And really, digital and the cloud are at the intersection of this transformation and critical to its enablement. And that'll be the focus of today's session. The energy industry is going through a massive transformation. And the energy transition is really the challenge of our generation. According to analysts, the planet's going to need 50% more energy than it has today. And while half that energy is going to come from renewable sources, the other half is going to come from traditional sources. And we need to ensure that we have affordable, reliable, and accessible energy to meet that demand over the next 30 years. But we also need to integrate new sources of energy and create lower emissions. This requires a reimagining of the current energy business. And it means that our future energy system will be built on data and scalable technology. And of course, the energy industry is evolving at a rapid pace, from acceleration of the energy transition, new sources of energy in production, to increasing electrification and the bidirectional grid. The design of the energy system of the future will enable organizations to organize their businesses and accelerate innovation. Data-driven solutions based on analytics, high-performance computing, IoT, edge, all along with autonomous machines that are connected by connectivity solutions are going to enable all this. The energy system of the future and its associated solutions will enable organizations across the value chain to achieve increased production, lower their operating costs, achieve greater speed and innovation, and produce more energy with fewer emissions. Now, what you probably know about Amazon, you're probably familiar with some of what Amazon is known for in terms of unprecedented scale, hyper speed, relentless innovation, and of course, being customer-centric in all that we do. And it turns out that all of these same attributes are exactly what the energy industry is going to need to be competitive, to increase its efficiencies, to incorporate new sources, and create the energy system of the future. Amazon as a whole is a leader in the path towards sustainability. In 2019, Amazon created the Climate Pledge along with Global Optimism and made a commitment to be net zero emissions by 2040, which is 10 years ahead of the Paris protocols. And there are already another 300 companies that have joined the pledge as well, and they represent in total about $3.5 trillion in global revenue. Amazon has also established a $2 billion Climate Pledge Fund, and this is to invest in clean technology across the value chain to develop solutions that are with difficult to decarbonize problems. We also have established the Clean Energy Accelerator to enable startups globally to scale their solutions where they get mentoring from AWS, our partners, and our customers. At AWS, we're focused on our data centers and powering our operations with 100% renewable energy by the year 2030. And in fact, we're on target to do that by 2025. We buy more renewable energy than any other corporate entity on the planet. And in fact, we've used more renewable energy, 3 times as much renewable energy as the next purchaser, as the second next purchaser over the last couple of years. We also develop solutions for other companies to help on their path to sustainability. One such tool is the carbon footprint tool, where customers can know what their carbon output, their carbon emissions equivalent is in the workloads that they move over to the cloud. And according to 451 Research, organizations can become as much as 4 times more efficient by moving their workloads over the cloud, and in turn lower their carbon emissions, sometimes as much as 96% per workload moved. Given how critical energy is and how much more data and innovation is needed to accelerate the energy transition, we've built an industry business unit around customers within AWS, specifically dedicated to focusing on our energy customers across the entire value chain. AWS Energy is one of 8 strategic industries focused on delivering products and solutions globally for over 7,000 energy and utilities customers. Our team has deep experience across the energy value chain, with many years of experience as energy operators, engineers, technologists, and innovators. We have a community of over 100,000 partners and 12,000 products that are sold in our marketplace. We also have specific competencies, solution partners with specific competencies. We have 36 certified energy competency partners that help us deliver and scale our products and solutions. We provide solutions across the entire energy value chain. And this is really important because the entire energy value chain, from upstream to midstream to downstream to renewables to power and utilities, is all more interconnected than ever. And so interoperability of data sets and these solutions is critical. A good example of this is Shell, obviously one of the largest oil companies in the world, has stated that by 2030 they will be the largest electricity company in the world. To make an impact in this space, it's important to work with the entire ecosystem. Customers in all subdomains as well as partners. In fact, some of our customers, like GE and Halliburton, Schlumberger, Baker Hughes, they are also our customers and our strategic partners. It is about the entire ecosystem utilizing infrastructure for energy. And many of those customers are well along the path to digitization in the cloud. A couple examples of those that are well down the road are Baker Hughes, an oil field services company that I just mentioned, chose to migrate its computational fluid dynamics applications on-premise from the cloud, and that helped the company save over 40% in HPC costs and reduce their wait time by 98%. And their HPC footprint on the workload that they moved, they were able to reduce the carbon emissions by 99%. BP, following a large acquisition, they were faced with complex operational and data structure and system. And to simplify this, they chose AWS as their industrial data platform, which provided a single repository of all real-time and historian data. And with the cloud, they were able to reduce IT maintenance costs, improve reliability, and visibility of their equipment. Enel, one of the largest power companies in the world, has been working with AWS for many years now, And with their over 61 million customers, Enel was looking to transform their business by reducing the complexity of their data center operations. They had half of their data center operations on premise, and they had the other half operated off with a third-party provider. And so they chose AWS as their platform for IoT and energy management, and they were able to save 21% on their compute costs and 60% on storage costs. Woodside, the largest energy company in Australia, migrated their energy platform to the cloud, and they've been able to enable greater speed, flexibility, and rapid experimentation. With over 250,000 IoT sensors in each LNG plant, they were able to optimize their production and maintenance like never before. The digital twin and robotics technology that they've employed is saving them over $6 million per month per plant. And these are some of the examples of many of the companies that are well on their way to using the cloud. And with that, I wanted to get to our panel and bring up our distinguished guest and have a conversation. So I'm excited to welcome to the stage three panelists. So Bonnie Titone, who is the SVP and CIO of Duke Energy. Rick Snell, who is the manager of digital foundations and enterprise architecture at Phillips 66. And Rudy Powell, who is vice president information and cybersecurity at New England ISO. Please come on. It is great to have you guys here. I'll put this over here. So I thought we'd just start with, I didn't do you justice to your roles in an introduction, so I thought with each of you, if I could have you talk a little bit about your organization, how you've embraced technology and are leading the development of the energy system of the future, and maybe provide a little bit of insight on your role and the vision your team has to accelerate innovation across your organization. And Bonnie, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thanks, Howard. I'm Bonnie Titone. I am the CIO at Duke Energy, as Howard mentioned. And I think about my role in two ways. One, the traditional IT functions, so infrastructure, operations, delivery, digital data. But then I have the other side, which is the security component of it. So think enterprise security, physical, cyber security, which is getting much more press over the last couple of years, as well as just the compliance component, given that we're critical infrastructure. And I think it's never been a more exciting time to be in a utility, especially us. We're a 100-year-old utility, and we're about to embark on the largest energy transition that the company has ever seen. And to be part of that and using technology really does make you want to be part of that innovation. People don't really think of utilities as an innovator, but hopefully what you hear today is that's very different and not the case from the three of us. So really excited to be here and happy to have the rest of the conversation.
Thanks, Bonnie. Rick, why don't we turn to you for the same
Great.
question?
So Rick Snell, I am manager of digital foundations and enterprise architecture. So I encompass a wide remit within P66, essentially all of infrastructure, along with edge compute, network, and then I also encompass project management and enterprise architecture. So for us, we are a cloud-first company, and we've been on this journey since 2017. And so for my organization, what we're really looking for is how do we fail fast? How do we bring innovation to the refining and the midstream business? Because that's where we have to be the most efficient to be profitable. So it's an exciting time to be in IT, especially at Phillips 66. And so I look forward to talking to you about that later on.
Thanks, Rick. And Rudy, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rudy Powell. I'm the Vice President of Information and Cybersecurity Services at ISO New England. And similarly in my role as traditional IT, I also have cybersecurity as in my title, as well as some of the power system support. And I agree with my panel members. It's a really exciting time to be in the utility industry, especially in New England. It's really exciting to be part of the green transformation of the electrical grid and having a role in that, and the challenges that can be met with more high-performance computing.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so Rick, I'm going to start with you. And please, I look forward to a lively discussion here. So Rick, energy security is top of mind now. Maybe you could talk about what steps Phillips 66 is taking to ensure a reliable supply of energy to your customers, and how AWS in the cloud helps solve this critical issue.
Sure. So I want to start with giving you our vision, which is in providing energy and improving lives. And so for Phillips 66, we produce energy through our portfolio of assets. So chemicals, refining, midstream, and commercial, and marketing. So, to be economical, we have to buy a wide variety of feedstock to be able to process that and make materials for providing energy today. Recently, the supply and demand, while supply and demand and being safe and being economical has been a real struggle for the industry as a whole. We know that in the future we have to produce energy in a different way. So with that, in 2021, we embarked on our emerging energy business. And so we look at that really in 4 different categories. First is renewable fuels. So Rodeo, which is in California, is one of our large biodiesel refineries, which we have all throughout California. We also are in partnership with British Air to look at ways of having sustainable aviation fuel. We go to batteries, and batteries, we have a strategic partner with Novonix, and we're looking at the different anodes for the next generation of batteries. From low carbon capture, we are leaders in that space, and we're working heavily in Umber, which is in the UK, on their zero emissions. And then lastly is our hydrogen. And so we're in partnership with H2 in the UK to provide retail hydrogen for about 250 stations throughout the UK. So we know that in the future we have to produce energy a different way, and so we're trying to align where we understand that type of energy. So we understand the molecule, the hydrocarbon molecule, and so if you look at our emerging energy business, that's where we're trying to align. How can AWS help us in that realm? I think by bringing the cloud closer to the edge for us, we do a lot of IoT, we do a lot of analytical models. So by being able to bring those microservices down to our edge, it's really been helpful in streamlining our business and increasing our efficiencies across the board.
Either of you two want to add to that? What you do, there's a lot of security in both of your organizations. So.
Yeah, I think when you think about any of the digital tools that we're building, you have to think about security not only as an enabler, but also how to have that equal voice and seat at the table, which is becoming more and more important as you're building technology. I think if you went back 10 years ago, maybe security was something that you thought about, but it certainly wasn't at the forefront of whatever you were building. And that has completely taken a 360, given kind of some of the geopolitical situations that we're dealing with. There's not a day that goes by you don't read about something from a security perspective that you have to care about. And I think it's given them a seat at the table and a loud voice in how you build and how you enable. And I think it's going to ultimately make the transition that we're all going to go on, this energy transition, that more secure, which is hugely important to critical infrastructure and what we're doing from an industry perspective.
Yeah, it certainly has to be a part of your culture, right? And we talk about shift left. It's got to be a part of your development pipeline, not an afterthought.
Yeah, I think building on that, I'd love to ask just each one of you maybe to comment on, as there are a lot of folks in this room who are probably thinking about moving the cloud and or their journey, different, at earlier stages in their journey on the cloud, and security is it's a big concern, it's a big issue, always security first for all critical infrastructure companies. Maybe a couple of the things that they should be keeping in mind as they think about it. Things to think about, things that maybe you would have doubled down on earlier in your own journeys, I think would be a helpful thing to discuss.
The first thing that I would say is go slow to go fast. Make sure you spend the time and the energy upfront thinking about what you're trying to accomplish and build the foundation appropriately around that. You know, when you take these decisions to make a cloud move or do something in the digital space, it's always about let's move fast at a pace and a scale, and that's all great, but you have to take the time at the beginning to make sure that you've built the right foundation. And that's what's great about some of the, working with AWS is, there's this kind of minimal security baseline that you have to work towards, but as critical infrastructure, we have to take that and go way above compliance. We have to think about risk and all the things that come with it. And I think spending that time and energy and building it into your development practices and taking the time to do that, I think will benefit you tenfold to go faster in the future.
When we embarked on our journey, it's truly a journey. It's not a sprint and it's not a marathon. It is a journey. And we started 4 years ago and we are at Cloud 2.0 at this point. So the most critical aspect that we found for being compliant and making sure is understanding of the network and how you get there, because you can make some very large missteps. Transit Gateway is your friend. VPNs are not. So, network is truly the way that you have to do a lot of foundational work. You also have to work in, config as code. Terraform, CloudFormation, whatever your choice. You have to have your folks really understand that. Because once you get to that foundational level, you have to be able to reproduce it very quickly. We have something like 250 accounts within AWS, and so it makes managing the platform very challenging, but we've done some very strategic things, especially around our VPC developments, that we are able to manage that appropriately. And so from a security perspective, we talk a lot about micro-segmentation and whatnot. You have to take that into account upon initial build and not as an afterthought.
Yeah, so being at the end of the panel, it's great. I'm in a position where I can say I agree with what they have to say a lot. So certainly, I guess one thing I think a really good slide from your standard deck, Howard, from when you came to talk to us is, Amazon is going to secure the cloud, but you're in charge of your whole environment. So I wouldn't do anything in the cloud that I wouldn't do on my own on-premise environment as far as lack of tools or instrumentation or visibility, common network security principles. And then certainly taking your time and building out your environment before you're depending on it for any of your production workloads is key, because otherwise you'll get yourself in trouble.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have you be first this time, Rudy. This one's for you. At ISO New England, no doubt reliability is among the top, if not, the top goal. But the grid has been fairly reliable for many years. Why are advancing modern solutions like cloud and computing necessary to ensure that the grid remains reliable? And maybe you can speak to some of the challenges with reliability that you've encountered over the years.
Sure. So ISO New England is the regional transmission operator for the 6 New England states. So our responsibility is, the reliable planning and operation of the bulk electric system for our region. So naturally, reliability is going to be our primary focus. And the grid has been reliable, as you say. But it is a grid that's in transition. We are seeing a proliferation of intermittent wind and solar resources. And on the flip side of that, the retirement of coal, oil, and nuclear generation. And in addition, we have a greater interdependency between the gas and electric industries than we ever have before. And what that means to us is that in order to maintain grid reliability in our mission, there's a lot more studying, planning studies, operational studies that we have to do. And that's where AWS has really come in. High performance computing on premise, becomes suboptimal almost as soon as we get it deployed. with AWS, we have the agility to run more studies and more complex studies at a faster rate, cheaper, more efficiently than we could ever do on-prem. And we've actually, proven that out for almost a decade.
Can you, just following up on that, can you kind of talk to some specific examples of that? I think it'd be interesting for folks to hear.
I mean, as far as the type of studies we run, steady state contingency analysis. And we also have forecast studies. We're using AI to predict load and the like, but more of that.
Great. Bonnie, we have recently announced a co-development project that we're super, super excited about.
Likewise.
It'd be great if maybe you could share with the audience what it is, talk a little bit about it, and why you decided to build it with AWS.
Yeah, we couldn't be more excited about this partnership. The buzz that got created over the past week, Howard and I were just talking about this, has just been awesome. So I appreciate all the work that went into getting us to this point. If I got to take you back a minute to talk about where we're going as a company, and then I can tie in why this partnership and collaboration made a lot of sense with AWS. We're going through a clean energy transition as a company. Over the next 10 years, we'll put $145 billion into our infrastructure, and about $75 billion of that is specifically around grid modernization. So if you think about a traditional utility grid, it was built 100 years ago, and it was meant to supply electrons outwards to people to power their lives. And now you think about distributed energy resources and people caring about the planet and caring about what type of energy they have. Think of solar and think of battery and think of wind. All of that now needs to go somewhere back on the grid if you don't have an ability to store it yourself, which most customers do not. And so it created this situation where we needed to figure out, how are we going to spend this $145 billion and $75 billion of grid modernization? And that's where the AWS piece came into play. We had built a suite of tools over the course of the last couple of years, 12 tools. I think about them in three components. One, grid analytics. So if you just think about all the meters that are in all of your homes, sensors that we have on the grid, that's producing a massive amount of data. And to Rudy's point, you can't backhaul that all and think you're going to do something with that in any reasonable time frame. And then there's forecasting around this. So once you get the data clean and you have that information, you need to think about, how can I take that and forecast what the next 10, 11 years are going to look like? And then ultimately, how do you take that forecasting information and plan out your distribution assets in the future? And so that's where AWS came into play. We recognized that if we were going to take that sheer amount of information, we kind of almost needed to bend the cloud to where the application was. And so we're going to re-platform all those applications that the team built in our legacy data center, put them out on the cloud, and then also work with AWS to figure out, how do we run simulations against all of that data to forecast and predict where we need to spend that first $1 billion in the future? And we're pretty excited about what AWS brings to the table. I mean, for us, we wanted to have the premier player in the space, have the tools and the history, and they bring that for us. And then the ultimate goal here is so that when we're making these decisions, we can take things that probably would have taken us 6 weeks down to minutes, right? Imagine giving that power to a planner to say, here's all the scenarios and the information, now you go decide where's the best place to go put a solar farm, or where's the best place to go build a battery system, or to a developer, here's where you should build because of our ability to support the grid that way. So that's what the excitement around the AWS partnership builds, and we're halfway through our first engagement with them and feeling really excited about what the future is going to bring.
Yeah, in a world where you can move applications that used to take days or hours into minutes, it sort of changes your perspective on what is possible and what can be done. Super exciting to hear you say that. I wonder if maybe the two other panelists could comment a little bit about some of the things that speed of operation has occurred in some of their endeavors moving to the cloud.
It's the change in expectation from the business. So, before, uptime was always something we had to deal with. And now with the cloud, the expectation is 100% uptime. Everything should finish within a second. And so we have to really look at how we build our infrastructure as a whole. And we have SAP S/4HANA in AWS. And so it's, we've learned a whole lot of how to make SAP cloudy, if you could say that. But the business really demands that SAP is available 7/24. And so we've done a lot in how we rebuild our reporting engines and how we look at how does the molecule travel across our pipes through our refinery and then out to the end customer. And so that's been, it's been revolutionary in a sense that, there's not a lot of folks that have gone down this journey quite yet. And so we're leading by example. And I think that, AWS has really helped us there. During COVID, we were doing an upgrade with SAP, and if we had had traditional supply chain type systems, we would still be there. You guys were able to provide us, 9 terabyte memory systems in, less than 10 weeks, which is phenomenal, because I know you guys had the same constraints we did. So a number of our key critical infrastructure projects would have been dead in the water without AWS. So that was definitely kudos.
Nobody ever said they wanted an application to run more slowly or a job to be done more slowly. So yes, we're revving up the expectations across the board. Rudy, back to you. I want to talk a little bit about sort of the advent of the energy mix changing and kind of how it has an effect on each of your organizations. So as a balancing authority, one of the important roles of the ISO is to balance the supply and demand of the regional grid. Does replacing the traditional dispatchable resources with intermittent renewable energy pose new challenges on the operations of New England Power Grid? And how do you think the cloud or AWS can help with that going forward?
So in a word, yes. Operating an electrical grid with a high percentage of intermittent wind or solar or other renewables is a much greater challenge than what we face just a few years ago. Actually, we partnered with both GE and Amazon all the way back in 2010 to create the first ever New England wind integration study. And this was developed in anticipation of determining the needs of the power grid with a high penetration, high percentage of wind. So we've continued to develop that model. We've evolved that over the years, integrated solar into that, and it's been crucial for us meeting our goals of maintaining a reliable power system. So, I guess one of the most illustrative examples is we now have a load forecaster in our control room. We added a console a few years back because it's so integral to us meeting the challenges of operating the system.
Rick or Bonnie, you want to comment on kind of renewable energy and how it's changed? Rick, on sort of, you mentioned carbon capture and kind of really sort of writing the rule book, right? Because it's new and a lot of what you're doing is sort of ahead of everybody else. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that and how the cloud is affecting that or could affect that.
Trying to think how I can answer this question because there's a lot of things I can't talk about. Let's see.
There is a lot.
Yeah.
Big topic.
Good topic. No, I think, for us, as I stated before, we're trying to align a lot of what we do in our emerging energy with our current asset base. And so, we talk about low carbon capture, but I mean, know how to answer this question. You know, for us, it's really about how do we approach it so that we can, you know, have a license to operate within the community, you know, lowering our emissions, really refining our efficiencies across the refineries, because by doing that, that helps us to reduce our greenhouse gases and whatnot. So, you know, with AWS and, you know, with some of our partners, we've really developed a lot of optimization engines and a lot of optimization analytics to help us streamline the processes throughout the refineries. You know, uptime for us at the refineries is key and critical to providing energy and fuels across the nation. So,
And I think it's a point that's not, you know, shouldn't be lost, which is, we say it over and over again, we're going to need more energy, not less. And half of that's going to come from new renewable energy, but half of that around the world is going to come from what we're doing today. And so making it more efficient, making it, you know, less prone to, you know, all the inefficiencies that exist, and we'll talk about that in a minute, actually lowers the, you know, it increases efficiency, lowers carbon emissions, and is better for all of us. So really good point there. And Bonnie, you talked a lot about the clean energy transition and what you guys are working. It'd be great to hear your sort of perspective on it and what, maybe go into a little bit more detail about what you guys are doing and then how you see cloud impacting that.
Yeah, I think I would, as we think about just the clean energy transition, I think we have to be very methodical in how we go through that transition, and kind of understanding what's happening across our grid is of utter importance right now. And the ability to know how people are using energy, where are they using it, so think location, and anticipating and using models and forecasting to figure out where are they going to need it in the future is going to be huge, from the ability to make sure that from a cost and a reliable and affordable perspective, which is next to safety, right, our number one job as utility. And that means making sure that you're building things in the right locations in order to make sure you're doing that, driving the reliability and the efficiency and the affordability piece of it. And I think that's the piece where I was talking about the cloud kind of bending. It's because we have to continue to optimize. We have to continue to look for ways to deliver the service on the back end, if you will, from an operations perspective, more efficiently and effectively as we're going through the clean energy journey. Because look, you can just go and put N amount of solar or N amount of battery once the cost comes down, and any other the renewable type resources that are coming, but they are far more costly than traditional energy like coal, like nuclear, like gas, some of these other sources of energy. So that has to be a factor in there. I mean, you could just do that tomorrow if money wasn't an object, but at the end of the day, you have to look for how do you do the work more efficiently, effectively. And I think that's the piece that the cloud brings to the table that we don't have in a traditional sense in a brick and mortar data center.
Yeah, makes sense. Speaking kind of operations and critical applications, Rick, Phillips 66 was an early adopter of the cloud at scale, going back to 2017 even, and has moved a large percentage of your critical applications to the cloud. Can you talk about some of the key business and technical benefits you realized moving to the cloud, and how you think about that today versus when you started?
Sure. So I think first and foremost was technical debt. We were able to erase our technical debt. We had, since the split in 2012, we were running systems to end. And so moving to the cloud, we were able to really erase that technical debt, especially in the telecom space, with our call centers, and the compute platform. Secondly, for us, it was able to shift capital back to the business. We are very, major projects, capital intense. So shifting over to the OpEx model was key for us, because we had to give that back to the business. Again, it helped us get to be more data centric. We'd always been data centric, but now the expectation is that we have real-time data to make every kind of decision for the company. And that's, instead of days, it's minutes. And I mean, I know that sounds very cliche, but for us, that was very, very key.
Can you talk about some of the, some of the specifics of what takes minutes now that took days? Because that's really interesting, right? And
Well, I mean, from processing, using our analytics with a closed feedback loop with some of our control systems, some of those models were quite intense, and we had some very basic models. And now with the cloud and the ability for compute, we're able to enhance those models, pull in many more factors, and really run those models over and over and over, as we should, and get a result within minutes. And so for us, that was key. What other things? For a number of the folks, we were able to change the way that we report on the business. The cloud gave us an operating model where, before we ran it all through BW. And so now we've been able to shift that out and use other technologies and build these reports on demand on the fly. From an infrastructure and operations perspective, we've really tried to make sure that we automate and we write everything as code, so that we do it once. It's a struggle sometimes. It takes a long time. But once we have that done, we're able to replicate it almost immediately. So refreshing SAP is a push of a button, which used to take 3-4 weeks, now takes a couple days. So those are probably some of the key points. I mean, I could go on and on, but.
Okay. Rudy or Bonnie, you want to kind of add on to sort of lessons learned or key points as folks are early stages of cloud adoption, what you learned that was key that you've either changed or doubled down on?
Sure. I mean, I can talk. You mentioned technical debt and kind of trying to get out of that. I'd like to call it like the little gerbil wheel of your environments, right? Every 3 to 5 years, you're, rebuying compute, you're rebuying storage, going through a huge upgrade project, and then it starts the timeline to happen again. So, one of the goals for us moving to more of a cloud first is to just break that cycle. Right, and then again, if you are doing infrastructure as code, you can secure it once, you can verify it once, configure it once, and then profit again and again. And that's the aspiration for us making use of it.
Yeah, I think the other thing is for us as we were going on our journey when we were building out kind of our pipelines and how we were going to develop, it gave us an opportunity to expose people to how you do it in a standard way using true DevSecOps and taking them on the journey. So, as they were going through their initiative, we were saying, hey, do it this way. Learn how to build it this way so that it is cloud native and you're building it secure right from the get-go. And we have found that has enormously helped the people side of it. Right? So you think about, you kind of almost have to build the next generation of what the technology leaders and teammates are going to look like, and exposing them to how to do this and really it gets them excited about what the future is going to look like and how they play a part in it. And we doubled down on that in a big way as it relates to our software development practices, which I think you maybe wouldn't do if you were thinking about a traditional data center, like a brick and mortar.
Sure. And Bonnie, building on that theme, companies with large engineering projects and managing critical infrastructure, like Duke Energy does, and all the panelists do, mistakes can be expensive. They can even result in safety issues, which as you mentioned, was sort of first and foremost for everybody. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you created momentum and overcame sort of the internal resistance to moving to the cloud, even for critical workloads. Yeah. And you mentioned a little bit about bringing folks along the journey, but are there other sort of piece parts to that?
Yeah, I think I'm in a unique situation, maybe not super unique, but the fact that I get to have both arms, the IT arm and the security arm, helped me here because I've created kind of shared priorities and shared goals and objectives and gave each team an equal voice at the table because, as Howard mentioned, while safety is fundamental to everything we're doing, if I think about safety from an IT perspective outside of telecom and things of that nature, it really is about securing whatever it is that you build, protecting your teammates, your customers' data, your information. All of that really ties into the safety piece. And I feel like by having the shared priorities between the teams and giving them an equal voice at the table, you're then driving towards a solution, but you're doing it together. Where in the past, if I think back, 5 years ago, we could be in a situation where IT was saying, I need to go deliver this thing, and they did that. And then when it got to the time to put it into production, security said, time out, this isn't really gonna work the way I need. And now it's almost the entry ticket, if you will, and we've built it to the manner of you really can't even get anywhere without doing that. And I think that was Rudy's point. It's kind of foundational to how we do things, and I think that's what's going to help us as we take this journey and not get ourselves in a situation where we've maybe done something that could infiltrate us or something like that. And I think that goes back to my point about going slow to go fast. You kind of got to be methodical about that.
Curious from each of your perspectives, we talk a lot about moving to the cloud in critical infrastructure is sometimes it's a long journey and sometimes it's difficult to get started, and many times it requires sort of a cultural shift and or sort of management as a whole in the company to kind of get behind it. Really curious as to each of your journeys in that area, like how it happened, and was that a big part of it, or was it more organic for your organizations when you initiated cloud on workloads? Rudy, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, so for us, in IT, we first had to convince ourselves of it, right? That's always step one. It's just part of our strategic planning. As we're on the kind of the utility industry, we try. I call it, sort of innovating conservatively, right? In a utility-friendly way, right? So once we were able to make those arguments as why it was going to benefit us not only now but in the future. And keep us out of trouble when we're not going to be able to do it with our own infrastructure on-prem, right? We had to make that a part of our strategic plan, sell that to our, the whole of senior management and the board of directors, right? So, and then once you kind of had that buy-in, then everyone's rowing in the same direction, we were kind of working our ways towards that, and now it feels a lot of it like we're on the other side of the hill. And everybody knows this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. It's exciting for everybody. And, we've got folks learning new skills, exercising them, and, it's part of our journey that, we're all really revved up about.
I would say for us, as I think about it, our foundation was the customer. Like, there was no way we were going to meet the customer's needs and demands. Things evolved, right? What a customer needed 5 years ago is not what they need now, and certainly not what they're going to need 10 years from now. And so it was that customer journey and where they wanted to go, and then our business goals tied to that, right? So that was kind of natural. And we started to drive the discussion around, there's no way we're meeting the business goals, which ultimately delivers on the evolution of where the customer wants to go, if we did not take this journey, right? There would be no way that we could respond to their needs at a time and a pace and a scale that frankly we need in order to meet our goals, right? Meet the clean energy goals and meet the customer's goals. And that was the hook that allowed us to have those continued conversations with the organization as a whole. Because once you start to show them examples of, look, how you can either solve a problem or deliver something much quicker than a traditional way, and it's good for the stakeholders and the customer and the company, why would you not say, let's get behind that and sign up for it. And I think it's a continued discussion that we're having to have every time a new problem comes up, right? We have to go back and kind of use those examples and always tie it back to the end goal or the end outcome that we're looking for. And I think to Rudy's point, people are starting to get it. People are starting to see it because we're also delivering tangible things that they're like, I can't live without that anymore. And then you've hooked them pretty much for life, I would say.
I think for us, ours was a little bit easier, sort of. So in 2017, we had a new CDO come in, Jana, and she had been through the cloud progression already. And so we had a champion from the top. And so it was really, how do we change the culture? Our strategy was, we are a cloud-first company. We do not do data centers. Everything we had done was data center on-prem. So we're going to get out of that business, and we are going to move to the cloud. And I think having that top-down champion really helped us. It was a huge change in the culture. We had to reorg. People had to learn new ways of working and new jobs. But once we started having successes, it just started to snowball. And going live with SAP, being able to take a lot of off-the-shelf apps and make them, so I keep using more cloudy, but getting them into the cloud, not just lift and shift, but to optimize them, we started to see a lot of success. And that was really kind of the huge benefit for us.
Back to Rudy on this. The ISO's roadmap is a great tool to set out sort of leadership expectations and the direction, which is so important to supporting this culture for change that we've been talking about. Maybe you could talk about some of the tools that have been useful to structuring your adoption path, some of the, at Amazon we call them mechanisms, things that kind of you use to make them work. How you've helped your people prepare and grow their skills with cloud technology, because it's new for a lot of folks.
Sure, and we're still in it, right? So to take Bonnie's go slow to go fast, right? I think the biggest thing was giving my people time to study best practices and come up with a well-architected design, inject some external expertise. And that's kind of provided us with a cloud foundation on which we can, send production loads in a way that fits our culture of security and reliability, right? So now that core team is going to be working with Amazon on a working backwards project. We have our goals and where we see ourselves in the future. And we're going to be laying out milestones along that way. And the way I foresee is that we're going to start incorporating more and more of our staff in that journey. So they're going to get the on-the-job training. We're going to augment that with traditional training. And it's basically, it's going to be a wave for the whole department that sets us up for success.
Right.
Yeah, I think the other thing to that point is everything Rudy said spot on. And I think giving people a safe space to learn, right? To give them a safe space. So we made a lot of mistakes, right? But that's what happens sometimes, right? You learn from those, and I think giving the ability to do it as part of their job and giving them exposure and making it okay if we don't get it right out of the gate, I think is also important to taking people on this journey, because it's new, right? It's new technology. Some of it's new to everybody, not even just new to your company, and that just takes time to acclimate and learn. And I think you got to let people do that.
Yeah.
To steal your slides again, right? You said 70% of new cloud installations are unsuccessful, right? Because they're not they don't have that metered approach, and we're trying to ensure that we're in that 30%.
Just having your people certified in AWS is licensed to operate. It is continually train.
Right.
They have to understand the technology, and they have to be able to fail fast, figure out what they did wrong, and then re-implement. Because you're not going to get it right the first time. I mean, we're 5 years into it, and we're in, as I said, Cloud 2.0. So we're reinventing our entire infrastructure in the cloud because of the things that we have learned. You guys have new products, Control Tower, and things like that. We are implementing those as we speak, and those are critical. And it takes your folks a while to get there, and it takes a lot to keep your folks. Staff is very, very difficult in the cloud world, and so relying on AWS to help third-party contractors, partners, those are key individuals that you have to be successful. One of the things you have to be able to do, though, is harvest that knowledge and bring it back in-house and make sure that your people understand what was done. Because when we started, we did a lot of things. We did not recognize it. We didn't understand why we were doing it. We just did it because that was best practice. And now we've kind of come back to realize we need to go back and redocument and re-understand what's going on.
Yeah, so important. In our closing few minutes, I'd like to kind of ask each one of you to talk about what you think is a key challenge going forward in this industry as it relates to your business, as it relates to kind of the future of energy, and a key opportunity or technology you're excited about. Rick, I'll start with you.
Start with me. As I just mentioned, I think technical talent is very, very difficult in this space because it is in high demand. So keeping those folks on staff is critical to being successful. Looking into the future, we do some digital twin. I think that digital twin is going to be revolutionary for us in the way that we look at molecules, and then quantum once it comes to fruition and we can actually really harness that power for us.
I'm hopeful that next year we can do an entire session on quantum computing in the energy industry, but we'll save that. Rudy.
So I will agree 100%. Attracting, keeping talent, and managing that, and keeping the talent we have, training them up, is certainly a challenge right now. And then, in addition, what I mentioned earlier is just how fast things are changing in the utility industry. It's kind of unusual for us, certainly post-COVID. Both from a talent and supply chain, cybersecurity point of view, all of those are disruptive changes that we have to deal with right now and new challenges. We're very excited also from the cybersecurity standpoint how cloud-enabled technologies can help us in that space, right? And certainly whether it's leveraging containers or other means by which to reduce the burden of vulnerability management and the like, and certainly infrastructure as code again. All of those we're hoping can improve our lot.
Yeah, I'd echo the talent piece. I'd say that the other thing on top of that is just the pace in which we need to change how we do our business. Meaning, think about the process and how you operate. If you think about all of these digital tools that we're going to bring into the space, it makes you have to rethink your problem and what you're trying to solve and your business process that you're using to get you there. And I think as that pace starts to pick up so that you can stay ahead or at least on par of competitors trying to get into specifically the utility space, I think we're going to have that mindset of thinking about and doing the work that we do differently, which tradition and culture tells us we should keep doing it the same way to maintain reliability and sustainability and all those things as a utility we care about in a big way. So I think that coupled with the talent, I think are going to be two of the biggest challenges. On the technology front, for me, I'm excited to see where the next generation of AI goes because I feel we are taking this journey ourselves from an IT department, and how do we take kind of information that we have and put the AI and models on top of it so that we do less manual work, right? And that, I think, is going to be game-changing because we're so used to having our hands on things from a technology department, right? That's what makes us great. But the reality of it is you're going to need that resource and that time and that effort on the next generation of tools, not on maintaining what you already have. And I think the AI piece, the next generation of that is going to help solve that in a big way.
Absolutely. Well, I've learned a lot from you guys today. I really want to thank all three of you for being leaders and innovators in the energy space and also joining me on the panel today. And I hope you guys learned a lot as well. Thank you for your time, and thank you.